So now you've pee trained, pretty much. Not at night, during the day, and not necessarily in all environments, depending upon whether the person knows how to request. You very much may need to get a speech-language pathologist involved around the requesting business at school. At home, the person just goes. Shouldn't have to ask. Right? Even if he's outside, he just goes inside, just goes, right? But in other environments, you got to ask, and if asking is not, requesting, asking, manding, I don't care what you call it, isn't part of what he knows how to do, you may need to get a BCBA involved or a speech-language pathologist involved, or ideally, or both involved. So now we're going to talk about poop training, bowel trip training, phase 3. So this kind of parallels what we just talked about. By the end of the phase, this person has learned that when you take him or her to the toilet at specific times of the day in the training setting, he poops or she poops. And in between those trips, he or she is clean, dry, clean. Doesn't yet ask to use the toilet, so self-initiation is not happening here. This is trip training. Doesn't stay clean in non-training settings, so if we've only trained at home, he's still pooping at school. If we only trained at school, he's still pooping at home. If we only trained at grandma's house, he's still pooping somewhere else, right? Like in non-training settings. And he may continue to need assistance with pulling pants up and down and blah, 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 although probably less assistance because you probably have chained that on as you've been teaching pee training, so he should know more about that now, right? But if he still needs assistance with that, that's a separate set of skills. So again, we need to figure out, okay, when are we going to take him? When are we going to take this person? So most people, I think I'm probably talking about most of you, tend to be more or less regular about when this behavior occurs. In the morning, at night, after you exercise, very common. Whenever. It's often first thing in the morning. It's often shortly after a meal. It's often during either a very relaxing activity, like I've had a hot tub now and better get out of the hot tub, or a physical activity like, going for a run or going for a walk or going for a bike ride, sometimes at the most inconvenient times. Doesn't matter. You need to figure that out. And so you're going to record when the person tends to have a poop. And for a couple weeks, you have to do this for longer than for trip training with pee, because pooping only tends to happen usually once a day, maybe twice a day at the most, but not on a really regular basis, and maybe not even every day. So you're going to have longer record than a couple of days. So record that. He's in a diaper probably, or actually at this point, if he's pee trained, he's in underwear, right? So you're going to have to help him change as soon as this happens because he's now in underwear if you're doing this as a separate endeavor. So you have to find the most common times a day for the person to poop. If the person's pooping more than 3 times a day, that's weird, isn't it? That's something like close to diarrhea or close to something. So that's a kind of clue that unless they're teeny poops, we're going to talk about the tiny poop problem, the tiny hard poop problem later on. So if they're tiny hard poops, they could be happening frequently. That's a constipation issue. That's separate. We'll talk about that. But if they're ordinary poops, sorry to be talking about poop so much here, but what can I tell you? If they're ordinary poops and they're happening more than a couple times a day, it's like, okay, why is that happening? It's weird. So remember when you were doing baseline for pee training, you recorded when poops were occurring? Well, now, this is why you did that. And so for this person, we see that around 9:45, there tends to be a poop. And around somewhere between 4:45 and 6:30, which is like right after school and around dinner time, there tends to be a poop. So now I know what my target times are. If it's all over the place, that's pretty unusual, I gotta say, but maybe it is unusual. Let's assume for the time being it's not. So now I know around 9:45 and around 5 o'clock, 5:30, somewhere in there, 6 o'clock, somewhere in there, maybe just before dinner or just after dinner, depending upon, that's when this person's gonna poop. So 5 minutes, 10 minutes, whatever, before the usual times, it's time to go sit. And sit for, 10 or 15 minutes and then break. And then, it's probably going to have to happen here. Sometimes if the person tends to poop at recess, this is very common, I find. He always poops during recess when he's sitting on the tire swing at school, or he always poops during computer time at school. Some people tend to poop when they're relaxed or when they're very engaged in a preferred activity. So if that's the pattern you're seeing in your baseline data, you might want to have the person sit for a period of time prior to that preferred activity. So go 10, 15 minutes before recess. In fact, have him sit there all during recess with some breaks if you can. And then part of the reinforcer is that he gets access to that preferred activity in addition to whatever else you're going to offer, right? Remember, if you see this kind of pattern, you already know that he's probably going to have to go. So if you sit him and then you take a little break and sit him and take a little break, right? And again, this is where you really want a comfortable, seated environment in the bathroom, right? Do you use the squatty potty much, Katie? Yeah, Katie and I both like the squatty potty where the person's feet are on a support that bring the knees up, so you're almost in I can't show you because I'm standing, but you're almost in a squat position on the toilet. That's the most anatomically correct configuration for peeing. Hunched over is not anatomically conducive, to pooping. And hunched over is not anatomically conducive, right? In a squat position. So, and often we see kids who won't poop in the toilet. They'll go in the corner, put a diaper on, and squat to poop. Well, if that's the case, let them squat on the toilet. Get what's called a squatty potty, right? You can use it with teenagers and adults as well. It just raises the feet, so you're in a squat on the toilet. You can use it with yourself. I don't know if that's an issue. Anyway, you have to make it relaxing and pleasant to sit, and ideally put them in an anatomically correct position. And remember, you already know he probably has to go, so this is probably going to happen, right? If he poops, of course, now you release the doves, right? Reinforce, applaud, all of that good stuff. If you've stopped, if you've faded out reinforcement for P training, you now reinstitute the same reinforcement system that worked for P training for poop training. I would say, by the way, I should back up, that about 50% of the time, you don't have to bother with this. They're going to happen simultaneously. Because often when you pee, you also poop. You might have noticed this for yourself. But if it isn't, and you have to do it separately, just reinstitute what worked for pee training now for poop training. Reinforce, applaud, yippee, whatever. Provide assistance, of course, with wiping, with flushing. And again, as with pee training, if the person is soiled between trips, clean him or her up right away. because remember, he or she is in underwear with washable plastic pants over the underwear. Minimal attention, minimal interaction, don't lecture, don't nag, don't, oh, blah, 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 don't say anything as you did with urination training, as you did with pee training. Okay? And again, you're going to continue in this phase till you've got 90 to 100% of BMs in the toilet for at least 2 weeks. Right? Same rule as for phase 1 trip training for urination. So now you can decide, go away, sorry. Now you can decide whether you want to trip train, and you can make this decision, anyway, you can decide whether you want to trip train now in a new setting. So if you've trained at school, do we want to trip train at home? Do we, right? Because he may not be trained in a non-training setting, or you can decide, do I want to move to phase 4 in the original setting, right? Don't move to phase 4 without training in another setting if the other setting is prepared to train. I know this business of multiple settings is really challenging for some of you because we're getting questions about that. And all I can say is that having someone trained in one setting but not in another is better than not having the person trained at all, right? So if you're at home and you've got a clean, dry kid, but at school they haven't trained, or they can't train, or they haven't done what you did, right? And that's too bad that he's having difficulty at school, but at least you're not having difficulty at home. And vice versa. If he's trained at school, but mom and dad or grandma or auntie or whoever just don't have the fortitude, the resources, this isn't a good time for them to train at home, okay, that's too bad, but at least he's clean and dry at school, right? And this isn't about judging the other environment, right? I see people do that all the time. Oh, they won't train at home. They won't train at school. What's the point of that? What's the point of that? That doesn't get us anywhere. It just creates bad relationships and dysfunctional communication. There's a reason that they're not able to train right now in the other environment. There's a reason for it. There may be all kinds of stuff going on in that other environment that you don't know anything about at school, or all kinds of things going on at school you don't know anything about at home. So, something's better than nothing. Half training or whatever is better than no training. So we need to really be generous with each other about that at any time, but we particularly need to be generous with each other about that in this time of COVID-19. Everybody's got more on their plate than they wish they did.